of the fall semester with people in the building and staff in the building, and the way that we're going to start thinking about sort of shared spaces within that building. These are all things that we're going to be continuing to fine tune as we work our way through the summer. But as Dean Gallini said, the idea here is not only to make sure that we can get people into the building as much as we can to do in-person instruction where you're comfortable with that, but also to make the resources of the building available, both in terms of sort of having study space and having access to research materials in the building, although a lot of that stuff we can do online, and so forth for those of you who need it and want it. So that document is, as you see, a pretty detailed document. We would be happy to answer questions with respect to the sort of particulars of how we're going to be working that out in the building, although Dean Gallini and I are going to be planning on doing something of a video to sort of show you just sort of how the building is going to look and the way that we're going to be moving through the building as we go forward in the next couple of weeks. The other two documents are the ones that you all may have more particular interest in because they really focus on the first year curriculum and the way that we are planning to structure the first year curriculum over the course of this fall semester. And I should say that it's likely to look very similar in the spring semester, although obviously we're going to sort of keep an eye on things and think about the way that this plays out. The basic structure, though, is laid out in the fall 2020 1L curriculum and academic plan. And as this basically articulates, you all have 4 classes, civil procedure, contracts, torts, and legal research and writing. The way that we're going to set it up is later on this week, we're going to have divided all of you up into essentially 5 different small sections, each one of which is assigned to one legal research and writing instructor. And then each of those small sections is lumped into 2 groups, and each group will have a different set of what we call doctrinal professors, the professors who are teaching torts, contracts, and civil procedure. And you will be with those professors over the course of the entire semester, as well as with the legal research and writing instructor over the course of the entire semester. And then what we're going to do is we will basically be alternating your presence or your ability to be present in person over the course of the semester on essentially a weekly basis. So if you are in LRW Section 1, you would be in my civil procedure class along with LRW Section 3. So you two are all, those 2 sections would be with me in the same civil procedure class, but half of you would be in class that week and attending, the other half will be attending remotely. And then the week after, we'll just trade around. And that's essentially what we'll be doing over the course of that semester. So one group will be in person, one group will be remote on an every other week basis. So that will give you a chance to sort of be in class with each other, to sort of assess what that interaction is like in person, but then will also give us the additional space in the classrooms that we need to try and make sure that we are being consistent with public health guidance and sort of reduce the amount and the number of people that are in the building as a general basis, so things are not quite as busy in there and quite as crowded as they can be if we had everybody there in person over the course of the semester. So that's the first basic principle, is sort of that alternating week on, week off kind of thing as far as being in person versus being remote. And then on top of that, we've additionally decided to approach torts and civil procedure in a way that we actually haven't done before, but we think that it may be a useful approach for this particular semester, simply in order to sort of reduce some of the transaction costs associated with moving in and out of the classroom on a regular basis and shifting things around. And so that's this idea of the block plan. And so in essence, what you will be doing is during the first half of the semester, you'll have LRW and contracts and torts. About halfway through that semester, that torts class, which will be on sort of an intensive basis, you'll be in class sort of twice as much for torts as you would have been for the other 2 classes. That class will come to an end halfway through the semester. You'll finish with a final exam around the middle of October for torts. The other 2 classes, LRW and contracts, will go all the way through the end of the semester. And then once torts is over, you'll switch over to civil procedure. And so for most of you, I'll be seeing you, or at least half of you, I'll be seeing you beginning around the middle week of October. And then we will be meeting on an intensive basis, somewhere around 3 hours in the afternoons on Mondays and Wednesdays and 2 hours on Fridays, and really sort of focusing in on civil procedure and sort of approaching things a little bit more intensively for civil procedure in the last half of the semester. So in some ways what this does is it really reduces the number of final exams that you have once you get to the end of the semester in the fall. You do have an earlier final exam in torts, but it also will let us finish up completely with torts at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the semester rather, and we will be then moving to civil procedure and sort of focus very intensely on civil procedure towards the end of the semester. And I think that this is going to create some really interesting opportunities to be able to do some things in class that we otherwise might not be able to do. Sometimes it can feel a little bit rushed if you're just kind of going in and doing a 1 hour or a 90-minute session. This will let us be a little bit more luxurious, and I know that Professor Simowitz and I have already started talking about sort of how it is that we're going to approach having this opportunity of these larger blocks in the afternoons later on in the semester, where we can really think about doing things a little bit differently than we might have traditionally been doing them as a matter for civil procedure. So that's the basic structure. The details of sort of exactly how that plays out and what sections are in person and remote and everything else are in the last document that I sent, but we don't need to go through that in any particular detail. But this is the one that's sort of got the colorful blocking as far as showing you which weeks your section would be in person versus which weeks your section would be remote. The last thing that I'll just note on this is that part of this plan involves having at least one section that is going to be entirely remote the entire semester. And so we know from the surveys that we did that there were at least some of you that were going to be feeling most confident being able to be remote basically all semester long, and that's perfectly fine. For purposes of planning that, though, we would ask that if you haven't already, let us know by sending an email to law-osa@willamette.edu that you would like to be remote all semester, and we will put you into that section. And then you will be remote all semester. We can reassess that certainly once we come to the end of the year and as situations change over the course of the year. The other thing is the whole idea of having these remote sections, right, is so that you're not sort of crossing what we would characterize as social bubbles, right? So that you have a situation where we have basically you're seeing the same 22 people essentially, or 25 people all the time during that week that you are in person. And that idea is interfered with to some degree if you then immediately go home to your apartment or to your house that you're sharing with another 1L who's in a different cohort, right? Who's in a different section. So ideally, if there are those of you who know that you are going to be housing with other 1Ls, if you would also let us know that information, then we will put you into the same section, and that way we can make sure that we're sort of keeping these bubbles sort of as isolated as we can on a reasonable basis. So that's the basic idea and the basic structure of how all of this stuff is going to be set up. And with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Dean Gallini to see if he had a couple of final closing points before we switch over to just questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. I guess I'll just bookend those helpful comments by kind of emphasizing this spring semester and looking ahead. We've gotten some questions about what that might look like. And I want you to feel like what we're doing today and what you just heard about, it's designed to be durable in the sense that we hope that the plan as we've outlined it will last us the entirety of the academic year, even if we have to transition in between lanes. So I don't want you thinking that we get to Christmas break and suddenly we're going to drop a completely new plan on you, but rather you're seeing it for the first time, but this should be the only time. So sure, there might be some changes at the margins in terms of whether we can fit more people into a room or there's a reduction in the mask requirement, but in general, the structure of our approach, we don't imagine changing. So with that, yes, let's please open it up. Feel free to use the raise hand feature, put something in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. So the question in the chat, which is a good one, is there going to be a disadvantage for students in Section 5? Will there be study groups available, an opportunity to meet other students to bounce ideas? So the hope is that absolutely not a disadvantage, but instead a challenge to all of us, both in administration, faculty, and staff, to recreate student community within the remote space, which I just would flag that we're all going to be challenged to do that, whether we're in that all remote section or we're doing exactly what we're doing right now. And we are asking our faculty to think about what does it look like to create that sense of community. It's something I certainly know that Dean Dobbins and I, Dean Straley, and many others have given a lot of thought to. And I would also point to some things that the SBA is doing in terms of their creativity and mentorship matching. So yes, we would imagine that study groups would be available alongside other opportunities. And maybe one other flag on this point, a credit to Dean Straley and her admissions team, which is this virtual student fair that's coming up that hopefully will be a nice early effort at the creation of community so that you have a sense of what our student groups are up to and the co-curricular opportunities that will be out there for you. Next, are masks mandatory on campus? They are, full stop. We received that guidance, I want to say about a month ago, give or take, and we don't anticipate any reduction in that requirement. That is a university mandate that the law school falls within. Governor Brown, I'm just reading from the chat for those of you who are wondering. Governor Brown just finished a press conference extending the mask requirement, including banning indoor gatherings beyond 10 people. Churches, businesses are apparently exempt. Are we a business, or does this impact our section size? So the idea here is that we have roughly 3 layers of guidance, give or take. Of course, we have the governor's guidance. We also have an entity called HEC, the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission, and then we have university guidance. So we are maybe not a business, but the easiest way to answer this question is that higher education falls under a sort of different umbrella. Now, it's entirely possible that the way that filters to us over the course of a semester is perhaps a good opportunity for us to make a friendly amendment to that question as a good example of how during the semester we may need to shift, and it may cause us to move lanes, right? So the framework we just learned about in lane 1 might cause us to go to 2 if we did receive a different reduction in class size that would otherwise impact our social bubbles.
And I would just point out that when we're thinking about this idea of gatherings, one of the things that we've really tried to do is set up the classrooms and sort of the number of people that we can fit into the classrooms in a way that we're doing that so that everybody is at least 6 feet apart from everybody else in the classroom itself. And it's my understanding that at least part of this discussion about sort of not having gatherings of more than X number of people inside is really focused on circumstances where you're definitely not able to maintain that social distancing on top of the sort of closeness associated with what's going on as well. So we're just sort of layering as many sort of layers of protections on top of the sort of standard understanding as we possibly can. While still trying to accomplish our ability to give people an in-person experience as best possible.
For those of us considering Section 5, how will we pay for tuition, books, and other things required? We don't imagine any difference in that regard. And Dean Dobbins, you might want to hop back in, but the thinking here with that would come through our Student Affairs office as well.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a variety of ways that we're going to be able to work this stuff out. I would point out that for people that are all remote, and I know some of you may choose to simply stay in sort of your home location so you're not present in Salem. If you do happen to be present in Salem or locally, this doesn't mean that you can't come into the building at all. It just means that we're not expecting you in the building for purposes of classes and so forth. So option 1, if you're not in Salem and it's a burden to get in, the Office of Student Affairs, the bursar's office, the relevant offices on campus that you're going to have to interact with. Those are all going to have ways that you guys are going to be able to interact remotely. So I don't think that that's going to be a real problem. For those of you who are going to be in state, it's going to be an opportunity to come in and have the distance interactions on campus if you need to. The real goal with that Section 5 was just to say, okay, for those, for certain students, we know that they don't necessarily want to be in the classroom itself. And that's really the only limitation that we're thinking about when we're talking about that Section 5.
The next question, there's been a few that have come in since, but if we are attending from out of state, will we be required to self-quarantine for the suggested 2-week period? So this was on the table early on in planning at the university level, and since then the protocols have shifted to more one that's focused on self-monitoring. And it's at this point that I might, in case you all don't have it, I'm going to put a link in the chat that you might appreciate having, that is the university's comprehensive return to campus plan, that gets into a lot of the weeds around what does it look like to physically return to the campus, and what does the university contemplate by way of community norms. For folks in section 5, will it be possible to arrange access to the library or other services physically on campus? Oops. I think that's right. I think we can talk about that, although I'll say the spirit of Section 5 is truly an approach for someone who does not want to be on campus. So I'm sure at the margins we can talk about it, but just keep in mind the more that we do deviate from the social bubble framework that Dean Dobbins outlined, the more that we get into sort of the crossing of those bubbles. So I think from our perspective, it would be more helpful for that student, or if you're thinking along those lines, to go ahead and register in a cohort, because the logistics of kind of the one-off approach is a little bit outside the spirit of the Section 5 approach. Although, again, we want to work with you, and I hope you're feeling that sense of flexibility.
And I'd say that this goes in some ways to the last question that came in about whether there's a possibility for those considering Section 5 to switch back to in-person classes if cases seem to be more under control. Again, I think the goal here would be, so let me emphasize that even if you are in one of the other sections, you are able to be remote. So even if you're in sections 1, 2, 3, 4, and you decide that you are not feeling comfortable being in the building, you can choose to be remote at that point in time. The thing is that if you're in those sections, we need to make sure that we're planning in a way so that those sections only have a number of people in it that we're going to be able to fit into the relevant classroom under the socially distant limitations, right? So our largest lecture hall can fit 158 people under normal times. In this world where we have a 6-foot bubble around everybody, we can fit 33 people in there. So if we're planning the structure of courses for the 1L classes in a way that we say, okay, we can only fit 33 people in this room, we've got a little bit of flexibility, but part of the goal of having the remote section is when people know coming into this, you know what, I'm just going to say I feel most comfortable staying remote in classes all the time. We can plan that those people are not ever going to have to be in the classroom itself, and so we don't have to work around them for purposes of that classroom. Now, that doesn't mean that as we get a little bit later in the semester that maybe we wouldn't possibly start to rethink that, but I wouldn't count on it. I think for these purposes, if you want to say, I definitely want to be in Section 5, you should plan on that being, yeah, I'm not going to want to be in the classroom until we get to the end of the semester, and then we can kind of rethink things again for the spring. Again, though, that doesn't mean that if you are in one of the other sections that you have to be in class. You are always going to have the opportunity to attend class, either in person, if you're scheduled to be in person in that classroom, or remotely, whether you're scheduled to be in person that week or whether you're scheduled to be remote that particular week and we'd be swapping back in later on.
So I'm going to skip down to, during the weeks we are remote, will we still be able to reserve library space to study? So this is the subject of some discussion in the library arm of our reopening task force. And as a general rule, the cohorts that are residential get the priority for access to the library, once again on the thinking of limiting social bubbles. However, there is room in that planning document, for those who really read closely, you would have seen that there will be a prioritizing opportunity for those who, for example, lack a quiet study space or perhaps are concerned about their Wi-Fi connection. And we're looking into, for those opportunities, the idea of a particular sign-up approach. But in general, to stick with the spirit, again, and hopefully you're sort of getting the theme, is that to stick with the spirit of trying to limit how much interaction or interplay the varying bubbles have. I would put yourself a little bit more in the headspace of during your off week. Off means both away from the classroom, but also away from the building. Again, with that narrow slice of trying to accommodate those who most need it. To clarify, will we be able to choose what section we want, or will these sections be assigned to us, and how early will we know our section and class schedule? Dean, you've been thinking the most closely about this. Why don't I turn this over to you?
Yeah, thanks. So with respect to the Section 5 people, what we've initially done is taken your responses to the student survey, and the people that we felt like were pretty clearly expressing a preference for remote learning, they will probably be assigned initially to Section 5 there. And also on top of that, if anybody else lets us know, either let us know over the weekend or within the next hour or two that you would really prefer to be in that section, we'll assign you to Section 5. As for the other sections, those will just essentially be randomly assigned through sections 1 through 4, with the exception of if you know that you are going to be living with somebody else who's also a 1L. And again, then we would just try and match you up into that single section. As far as timing, like when you're going to know your section and class assignments, that certainly would be by the end of the week and probably before that is my guess.
If we choose to be remote in the fall, but we want to be in person in the spring, are we able to switch? So I think two things there. First, yes, but also keep in mind Dean Dobbins' earlier comment that for some reason at the outset during the semester you selected residential but feel uncomfortable. There is the built-in opportunity for every residential section to likewise be remote. So you, again, have the ultimate flexibility here, or at least that's the hope. Will we? Yeah. Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I was just going to say that on the flip side, right? So if you choose remote in the fall, and then you say, yeah, things are going okay, I guess I want to be there present in the spring, I certainly anticipate that we're going to have that option. Now, the one trickiness associated with that is that you are going to have a single LRW instructor, right, per section. And so if a lot of the people in the remote section decide to divide out and to switch into a circumstance where you want to be in person, that's going to take a little bit of thinking, and it may require a little bit of change in possibly in even your LRW instructor. And that's just something that we're going to have to think about with a little bit more care. But at least at this point in time, I would certainly anticipate people being able to change their mode from fall to spring if that's something that's going to make sense to people.
On the question of library carols, so yes, the total number of carols and table seats on a social distance remeasuring has dropped to 140. So the current plan is to assign students to carols and tables on a week-to-week basis. So when you are in your residential week, you'll be able to leave your textbooks, your other items, and then to prepare for the next cohort coming through, they'd be removed at the end of your assigned week in order that the space can be cleaned. And then this is another example where ideally as the public health guidance lifts or otherwise doesn't get constrained, we can expand the access. But you'll notice in addition to on the one bookend flexibility, the other bookend is we're trying to be as conservative as we can, understanding the most conservative, of course, would be we just be remote all the time, but the incremental difference there is really trying to give ourselves ample time between the turnover in our social bubbles.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan Kirk here. So I just had a question regarding the sections and our study groups. Are we only going to be able to study with people who are in our sections?
I don't think that would be the intent. Really, the way that I would think more about it is who are you physically with? But as Zoom becomes more and more a reality of both the educational delivery, but also I might add that the way that the law is being practiced right now, I think getting used to study sessions that include people in different social bubbles, but perhaps by Zoom, would be the better way to think about this, because we certainly don't want to restrict interactions, but maybe we need to broaden what we mean by interactions just for sort of this temporary period to get us through the semester and beyond.
Let's see, I think it's, yeah, Ms. Beck.
Hi. I was wondering what class participation is going to look like when you're remote. I know cold calling is a thing and everything. How is that going to work with students that are going to be remote? And how are we going to like ask questions and things like that in class?
So, I mean, I can say something about this. I've been thinking about it some and thinking about how it worked in the fall. And Dean Gallini has some observations about this too, because he experienced it in the fall as well. So it's obviously going to depend on each instructor. And this is true even when everybody's in person, sort of the process of participation and calling on people. So, for instance, I would certainly anticipate the possibility of people doing exactly what you just did, which is, waving their hand. And in class, I'm going to have both a screen with Zoom on it and then the people that are in person in front of me as well. And I'm going to be trying to keep an eye on both of those things. The other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be having what we're calling Zoom assistants or ZAs. So current students, returning students, whose job it's going to be basically to keep an eye on the Zoom screen and to see when people are raising hands, either using the hand flag or actually physically raising hands, or seeing the chat questions pop up, and then sort of serving just as a visual sort of guide to the professors in the classroom so that if they're not seeing what's going on the screen, they can still see what's going on there. Now, there's likely going to be other professors who may choose to do this in a different way, i.e. they may say, okay, for this week, the following 5 students are on call, and I'm going to be going to you to ask you regular questions, and you may be present in the classroom or you may be present remotely, either way. And so there's really going to be sort of a fair amount of opportunity to do that both directions. The other thing that we've done is we're setting up the classrooms in a way so that there's going to be a monitor in the classrooms where if there's somebody who's remote and who wants to ask a question, we will have that person be able to pop up on the screen in the classroom so that the people who are actually physically in the classroom will be able to see you as well asking those questions. So there's going to be a fair amount of movement back and forth, and in some ways this goes back to this question about sort of to what degree are the Section 5 people going to be disadvantaged or not. As a practical matter, in some ways, sort of the lack of having to transition, being in person and then remote and then in person and then remote, may actually be a transaction cost that those students are going to be able to avoid and might be useful. They'll sort of get the rhythm of sort of working remotely as opposed to being in person. On the other hand, of course, being in person is a good thing too. You're able to do certain things and sort of see certain and read the room in a way that might not be identical. But we really are going to sort of, I guess I would say that this is one of the things that in a lot of ways the faculty has been thinking about, in addition to just how to present classes in a remote space. It's been this question about how to encourage and maintain and enhance engagement in a circumstance where you've got people both remote and present in person. And this is something that we're continuing to work on over the course of the summer and have already done. I could probably be in a webinar every minute of every day if I wanted, sort of talking about this sort of thing. But every once in a while, I have to sit down and kind of digest it and take it in a little bit and sort of see how it's going to play out in the course of my classroom. But that's the basic idea, is just doing our best to keep an eye on both scenes. And we really want to be as seamless as we possibly can be, recognizing that it probably won't be perfectly seamless, but we'll do our best. Other questions?
Hi, my name's Lauren, and I'm a 1L coming in, and you might have already answered this question. I've been going in and out. My phone's been kind of having bad service, so my apologies if you already went over this, but what will the access be like to the library?
And we talked a little bit about this, and
Okay.
No. Happy to talk about it. We talked just a little bit about it, and there will be 140 study carrels that are remeasured, or plus seating that are remeasured after our social distance measuring. And as a just sort of firm general rule, library access will go with your residential cohort, and you'll alternate that access on a week-to-week basis with your cohort. So on the week that you are residential, you can leave your textbooks, your other possessions and belongings in the library, but then at the end of that week, you'd be expected to remove your items so that we can clean the space in preparation for the next group coming in.
I'd also add that, and you guys may have seen this in the documents, that we've decided to go wholly remote with all of our larger upper level classes, as well as sort of a presumption of remoteness for our smaller upper level classes, although that may change. Once we have that dialed in, we may find that we've got some additional space available in the building in terms of classroom space and otherwise that we could also assign to students, again, in a socially distant way, but to be able to use for purposes of study space during the course of the week. So we might be able to increase those numbers a little bit, but this is part of the thing that we're still trying to sort of dial in the details about as we get closer to the fall.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
As to being remote, is that going to be something, being in the Section 5, as we call it, is that going to be an option for an extended period of time or just a temporary thing?
So as an initial matter, that the plan is to have Section 5 be all remote all semester long. And then we will reassess when we get to the spring. Again, in any of these circumstances, it doesn't matter what section you're assigned to, you're always able to go remote if you want to. And as Dean Gallini indicated, this was going to be an option extending even into next spring. Even if we don't have a section designated as Section 5, that's still going to be an option in the spring. The main idea there is simply that we know if people are in Section 5 and are comfortable in Section 5, that we don't have to worry about making sure that there's physical space for you in the classrooms in the building, because we know that you're going to be remote. So that's just all it is in some ways sort of more of a convenience for us than it is for all of you, so that we know that we don't have to anticipate the possibility of making sure that those 33 seats available in room 201 are going to be filled by which people. But there's always, of course, going to be an option available as far as people being able to go remote at any time along the way. And then again, once we get to spring, I anticipate we will still have a similarly designated section, but we'll be able to talk a little bit more about exactly how that's going to play out in the spring as we get a little bit farther along and have a better sense of sort of what public health is showing us as we get to that point.
So just again on that, would you still recommend out-of-staters move over there and get to Salem?
It's totally your choice, and maybe Dean Gallini has a further thought on this, but again, as is always true, for those of you who are currently out of state and who are thinking about not coming to Salem, there is going to be an option to be remote in the spring as well as obviously in the fall. And the only question is really a question more about what you prefer. And it could very well be that if we get to the spring and all of a sudden we've got a vaccine and they've been able to distribute it automatically to hundreds of millions of people, maybe people will say, hey, I really want to be there in person. And maybe at that point, people would say, well, okay, maybe I would like to be in Salem. And obviously that's going to be a difficult decision if you're trying to do it in the middle of the year. The likelihood of that being true is probably low, but that's the only thing. It's more about what you are comfortable with in your particular circumstances than about what we're going to require. We are going to have as much in person as we possibly could do, but you will always be able to be remote through at least this year, if that's what you choose to do.
Just a big exclamation point on that. Speaking for our whole community, we want you to feel comfortable that you are empowered to make the choice that makes the most sense for you, your family, and your situation. We want that flexibility for you, and we're here to advise, but this is not the year from our standpoint where we are going to dictate where and when we want to deliver the highest quality education we can, but on the framework of personal choices, we're much more here to be a sounding board and to help you work through the options. What else can we help with? I'll say maybe as a quick commercial break in our Q&A that this really is kind of the speak now or forever hold section of our planning. So I certainly don't want to keep us longer than necessary, but I also want to balance by making sure that you really do get your questions answered. And I'll maybe just add that by way of process, I know we had some questions about, well, when will I get registered? When will I see my schedule? In real time, we're going to start working on that right after this is over. So we want to give you a couple hours to digest and reflect on this conversation. But really, if we can have your feedback, if there's anything that today's conversations change about your thinking, it would really be beneficial to have your feedback in I think it was put into the chat earlier, the Law at OSA Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Law-OSA at Willamette email, so that we can have that feedback as part of our registration planning. So, yes, please.
Hi, I've had a couple of questions come through for students who are not present right now.
Great.
Can you talk, you and Dean Dobbins, what the technology will look like so that the students choosing Section 5 can talk about the experience that they'll have?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a little bit of the high-level overview structure and what our hope is, and then Dean Dobbins can take us into the weeds. So we've prioritized 5 classrooms that have what we're thinking about as kind of dual infrastructure that will both be, this was a new term for me, BYOD, bring your own device. So the professor shows up and there's a dock that the professor can plug into, whether you are a Mac or a PC person. And then the professor opens up Zoom and students who are attending remotely present both on the computer in front of the professor, but also on a drop-down screen behind the professor. So the idea is what's behind the professor is the drop-down screen of remote students plus a whiteboard available for writing and illustrating. And then there'll be a camera, give or take 3 rows back, that is lecture capture of the interaction that day. And when the class is over, that would automatically upload into your personal intranet for viewing later, with the idea being if you were remote that day and for some reason had an unstable Wi-Fi connection and you were sort of in and out through circumstances beyond your control, that class would still be available to you for both rewatching, just as a general matter of academic support, but also in the instance that for whatever reason Wi-Fi failed. So that's sort of the general premise. And Dean, I don't know if I've left anything out or that you might add.
Yeah, I just say on the question of recording that came in, I think different professors are going to have different policies. Some will just sort of automatically make the recordings available and you can just click through and find those automatically. Other professors, you may need to send them a note and just say, hey, I had a problem with my internet connection today. Can I get the link to the recording? Different professors are just going to approach that slightly differently, but the recordings will be there and will be available. And I would expect that sort of as you get toward the end of the class, if you want to be able to go back and look at old recordings, professors would be willing to make those available as well. The other thing that I would just say on the technology, the camera that's going to be in the center of the classroom, Dean Gallini went and I went to look and see the way that this camera works, and it's actually, I think, going to be a very nice way of being able to interact. It basically has got essentially 360-degree vision around the classroom and a pretty good zoom lens on it as well, so that I can sort of, if I'm standing up in front of room 201, teaching to 30-ish people in 201, as well as everybody else who's going to be remote, I can be working on the whiteboard. I use the whiteboard a lot, you guys will find. I can be working on the whiteboard on one side of the classroom, on one side of the front of the room, and the camera can be zoomed in on that side of the whiteboard so you can see what's going on there. If I switch to the other side, there's another preset on the camera that can just automatically pan to that side. If somebody in the back left of the classroom asks a question, I can press a button on the remote control and the camera will slew around and look at them so that that person can be captured on Zoom. And then we've got microphones in the classroom, sort of in various places in the classroom, that should do a good job of capturing the sound in the classroom as well. So the people who are remote should be able to see a lot of those opportunities. The other thing that I should mention is that I think that at least one of the civil procedure classes is going to be all remote for everybody. And so it's just going to change things a little bit for one of the courses. And so as you're thinking about sort of weighing the pros and cons of being remote or all remote, we're going to walk into it sort of knowing that that's true. And it's entirely possible, as I know everybody's aware, that if for some reason public health tells us that we've have issues, then we may need to go all remote for a couple of weeks in a row as well. So there's, as much as we do this planning, it kind of goes back to Dean Gallini's original point, which is sort of we have these 3 paths and we're sort of ready to shift from one to the other at any given moment if it's necessary. And so we're definitely going to be able to do that. Let's see. I see a question about whether or not there's going to be a video on using the online learning system. I think we're definitely going to try to do this so that we're going to have at least, certainly going to be some Zoom lessons going on during the course of orientation. just because we're going to be using Zoom as a platform for those of you who aren't in the building in person during the course of orientation. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities to learn how to do that. I know that several of the first year instructors have been talking about trying to arrange sort of, coffee hours or happy hours or sort of just kind of quick informal get to know you kinds of meetings in advance. And I would hope to be able to do that also as a way of helping people understand exactly how to use Zoom and sort of different ways of looking at the displays and sort of seeing and understanding what's happening on Zoom in that particular circumstance as well. So definitely we're going to be all very expert at Zoom by the end of probably the first week, hopefully, and maybe sooner than that.
Yeah, on the question about the comparable to Blackboard, so we at Willamette use Wise, and I'm just going to put a link in the chat that at least for those who are interested in getting familiar early on, you can sort of hunt around on that site. There's a user guide, and a tool overview, and some design tips that you might find helpful as we enter into some of these tech-focused conversations. What else? Is there anything else in our closing few minutes?
Good afternoon, Deans. Hi, it's Jennifer. So I have a question about, you just put that link in and I'll take advantage of that. So will you populate that? Is that a platform with the assignments, and then will assignments be uploadable to those sections?
So there's a few different ways that this is going to work. So Wise is basically sort of the central clearinghouse for links where you can find what the Zoom meeting for this class. That's all going to be available through Wise for your particular courses. I always have, for instance, my syllabi and sort of the latest reading charts available on Wise, where people can go and say, okay, what's my reading for today? What's going on here? The LRW instructors, I think, are still thinking a little bit about how they're going to do assignment submissions and sort of gathering of information. I don't know if they're going to be doing that still primarily through email, or if they're going to use some of the capabilities that are available on Wise or other sites to basically have assignments turned into them. But again, we're encouraging people, as many of the faculty and instructors as we have as possible, to sort of do things centrally through Wise, so that people are only working on one or primarily focused on one particular platform as opposed to a variety of other platforms. There are a variety of other capabilities on Wise that there's chat functions and schedulers and stuff like that, which I haven't used as much in the past, but I'm certainly going to be trying to use more often in this coming semester, in this coming year, than I have in the past as well. So the idea is that that's sort of the central clearinghouse for a lot of different functionality. Whether that's the only one that you end up using may depend to some degree on individual professors, but we're really encouraging people to go that way.
Thank you for the kind comment, Tony. It's been actually silver lining has been, from my vantage point, having only, quote, started 13 days ago, and having worked on this with others for the last couple months, I will say it's really brought our community together, and we were a strong community to begin with, and that has been a tremendous theme that I anticipate will continue to resonate throughout the academic year. So why don't I do this? Why don't I turn us to a little bit of sort of hard and fast process, and then I'll hunt around for one more batch of questions. And then, of course, you're welcome to email anything. So just, if we could have any last moment feedback in the next couple hours, that would be great. And so here's the why. The plan that you received on Friday is still subject to university review and approval. Ideally, emphasis on the word ideally, we'd like to submit that plan at the very end of today, because the university approval process that meeting will take place tomorrow. There'll be an additional opportunity later in the week that as a backstop if we needed it. But we'd like to submit it to that group, the university group, tomorrow. And then from there, what it enables us to do is populate your classes and move into one other phase of this, which is the public phase that I would just put on your radar. We intend to roll this out at a public level on two ways, one of which being the why and the second of which being the how. So the why will be an audio podcast recording along many of the same lines you've already heard today, but really the gist is to provide some insights into, if you were sitting in our chairs, what did we think along the way as we were working through this plan? And so the hope is, for those who are really interested in the nitty-gritty of the detail around what got to this place, that would give you a sense of the why. And then while that's evolving and the plan is done, we're going to go start actually, once we receive university approval, we're going to go start actually marking the building, both in terms of seating, staircases, elevators, you name it. And then there'll be the how. There'll be a video of us walking through the building and kind of introducing you to what that experience will look like. And really trying to, what's near and dear to my heart, putting a positive framing on this. We can't control the circumstances we're in, but we can certainly highlight the wonderful opportunity that this presents to build community in a disruptive space. And so that video is sort of our vision of our first chance at doing that. So you can expect in that sort of framework, in that order, what our next steps are from here. And I'll just close with one other small thing, which is this enrollment in, and this is a small slice compared to those other things. You've all been enrolled in the Lawyering Fundamentals class, which is new for us, and we're anxious for your feedback, good, bad, indifferent. And so please keep that coming in as we evaluate the quality of the tool it is for all of you. And relatedly, keep in mind that that's what's called asynchronous delivery of coursework, which is nothing like what you're going to experience in the fall. This Lawyering Fundamentals is truly a pre-orientation engagement tool, but please do not think that because it's self-paced that that's going to look anything like what the fall semester and the fall interactions will look like. So with that, I'll take one or two more if we have them.
Just offer up a couple of other points on the question of sort of building community and engagement. I know that all of you have already been matched up with mentors that the Multicultural Law Students Association and the SBA have worked on matching you all with, which is great. I understand also that a lot of the student organizations are going to be trying to do essentially sort of their own presentations and connections with the incoming students along the way. So that's going to be another opportunity to match yourselves up. The other thing that I just sort of encourage people on a general basis to think about is the importance, especially in a space where you're going to be remote for at least part of the semester, everybody, of continuing to sort of push yourself a little bit to participate and communicate in ways that maybe it's a little. I think when you're present in the classroom, and sometimes it's easy to sit back and to sort of observe and still to be there and to sort of be participating, but being as active as you possibly can, and not only in the substance of the classroom, but also in just the processes. I know as a faculty member, I really appreciate it when I get feedback from students about what's working in classes and what's not working in classes. And so, recognizing sort of the value of tone and sort of, matching up sort of, hey, this works, but hey, this didn't work so well. We always welcome the utility of having you comment and say, this is what's making sense and this is what's not making sense. Or if there's questions, or if you feel like you are not tracking in some ways, or if there's a space where maybe you want more information, reach out. I mean, this is what we are here to do. One of the things that we really want to make sure is that, this barrier in front of us is a false one, right? I mean, I'm seeing into 50 different people's rooms at this point in time, and the ability to do that is in some ways a way to really create communities in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So take advantage of that. Recognize that we're all coming at this from as good a position as we possibly can. We're trying to make sure that this works as well as possible for everybody, and we'll have little hitches along the way. But I think that in the end of the day, we're going to be able to accomplish good things here going forward. Let's see, a couple other questions. It looks like maybe.
Yeah, I can take this last one. No, there would be no plan to interrupt housing should the university have to go remote. We don't anticipate that right now.
Yeah, as I recall, even at the end of the last semester, they allowed students to stay on campus, the undergraduates. So that certainly would continue to be the case, I would think, in the fall.
Well, with that, I'll say one last big thank you to all of you for your feedback and participation. and you can look forward to registration along the lines we visited about in the coming days, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Great. Thanks, everybody.